Thank you, directors, for your time. My name is Rafael Reyes, Director of Energy Programs for Peninsula Clean Energy, and I'm happy to provide this overview of the community energy programs at Peninsula Clean Energy. And this video will focus on broad strategic aspects of the program. Peninsula Clean Energy, of course, the community programs draw from the strategic objectives in the strategic plan. The first of which is the organizational priority to advance the region's progress towards comprehensive decarbonization by 2045 in alignment with state objectives. For the community programs, this includes robust energy programs to bring down emissions, as well as aligning the supply and demand of renewable energy, and then finally ensuring that stakeholders throughout the community are benefiting from these programs. This has three major elements. The first is what we describe as signature programs. So building on the early momentum in electrified transportation, and then secondly, starting the transition on building electrification. And of course, because we provide cleaner electricity, then electrification of transportation and buildings reduces emissions. In addition to that, we want to deliver tangible benefits, as noted earlier, and then really drive innovation and scale in our work through a variety of means. I should note that some programs emphasize greenhouse gas reduction, and other programs may have a stronger emphasis on community benefits. These are all complementary, but not necessarily identical from program to program. We have a programs team made up of 5 team members, including myself, Philip Kobernick, who has deep experience in electric vehicles as a former fleet manager for Alameda County. Shraddha Mutyal, who heads up our buildings work, similarly has extensive experience with the built environment. Alejandra Posada, who heads up portions of our EV and portions of our building work. And then Peter Anbiel, who heads up our electric vehicle infrastructure programs. As background, San Mateo County emissions in 2015 were approximately 5.2 million metric tons of carbon dioxide, with the electricity sector accounting for somewhere a little under 800,000 metric tons. Subsequent to the launch of Peninsula Clean Energy, the emissions came down substantially, somewhere in the neighborhood of 4.1 million metric tons. These are not precise numbers, and the methodologies vary somewhat between these 2 years, so they should be taken as approximations. At that point in time, though, Peninsula Clean Energy's electricity was approximately 90% greenhouse gas free on an annualized basis and accounted for the majority of the decline in emissions. And the pie chart on the right indicates where the emissions, the largest emission sources are coming from. And as you can see, transportation accounts for approximately half the emissions, and then methane, or what typically called natural gas from buildings, accounts for nearly a third, and hence our program work is targeted at these 2 emission sources. Moving to 2021, PCE electricity has become 100% greenhouse gas free on an annualized basis. So the blue portion declines further, but some still remains due to direct access and bundled customers. It's important to note that we affect change in a number of different ways. Naturally, most folks think about how we influence individual decisions through our incentives, technical assistance, and education work. But in addition to that, we help advance innovation through the technologies that we bring in through programs, the methodologies, and the data that we make available to stakeholders both within our region and beyond to help advance these innovations. And then importantly, we also help with policy. and this may be through local governments, as in the case of our support for local governments building codes enhancements, the REACH codes, but also with state agencies and our engagement with the building codes, CalGreen, California Public Utilities Commission, the California Energy Commission, and others working very closely with our policy team. And then finally, it's important to note that to be able to do all of this work, it's essential that we be a trusted entity within the community. And the role of the board is essential in that, and obviously with the marketing program providing a key component of building that trust in the community. Briefly, a note on our programs portfolio. I won't go through all of the programs in detail here. We do have two other segments, video segments, that will go into more detail. But the programs team is focused on buildings and transportation, as I noted earlier, and then the power resources teams also advances our resiliency or distributed energy resources portion of our work. And the whole pie, if you will, as shown here, outlines all the areas of our work. So as you can see, in buildings, working on new construction with REACH codes and technical assistance, existing buildings, our incentives, turnkey programs for low-income residents and the like, and then moving into transportation with our work in new mobility fleets, and then private vehicles, which is actually our largest portion of work. On the right, you can see distribution of funds looking at fiscal year 21 through 24, looking at the entire portfolio. That's about $35 million, looking in this time frame. And for, again, the community energy programs, which focuses on buildings and transportation, it's about $28 million in that time frame. Here we have a summary of some of the metrics of outcomes to date. I won't go through all of these in detail, but just want to call out a couple things on the buildings REACH codes. 11 agencies in San Mateo County have adopted them as of the end of March. And in conjunction with our partner Silicon Valley Clean Energy, collectively account for half of the building REACH codes adopted in the state. So that's been a huge success. But as you can see here, we're also providing substantial assistance to developers and contractors and the like throughout the region, and then a number of other metrics in other areas. So we have 3,200 ports that have been applied for through our incentive programs, electric vehicle incentives, including for the low-income community, nearly 100, innovation pilots, and of course the leadership work that I mentioned earlier on engaging with policy. We have a number of pilots in development. I'm only going to provide brief highlights here. For example, we have a very exciting building technology company that we're working with called Harvest Thermal that has an integrated space and water heating system, which not only provides hot water and space conditioning, but it also allows us to shift the timing of when electricity is used to align it with available renewable power. We are also developing a pilot to have electric vehicles provide power to buildings. This will be, we're looking to work with municipality on this and still evaluating the details of this. This would be an early example of use of electric vehicles for resilience purposes. We are actively working on electrifying ride hailing, which is very high, under normal circumstances, very high mileage sector with very high greenhouse gas emissions. And we have a pilot planned working with Lyft. And this would be a first in the state pilot, 100 electric vehicles with Lyft that we hope to launch this year. And then we're doing a feasibility study around curbside charging, where we think that there may be opportunities to advance EV infrastructure and are quite excited about that as well. And to close here on our last two slides, some key performance indicators. Here you can see where we stand as of the end of 2020 in terms of our initial metrics. We've been working now for 3 years in development of programs for PCE. It's still quite early days, but we're starting to see some results. And if we look at 2020, the greenhouse gas results here are expected average annual numbers in terms of emissions benefits in transportation and buildings. This is primarily the REACH codes. Still early days in terms of actual installed EV charging ports and appliances that we're providing incentives for, but we're starting to make advances. And then we are also tracking very closely the funds that we're allocating to support low-income and underserved communities. And as you can see, for 2020, performed quite well in that regard. We do expect to see that level off a bit as the programs ramp up. A bit more detail on our investment with for low-income communities. This is across a range of programs, and this includes our resilience programs. So you can see here significant investments on electric vehicles, our Power On Peninsula providing battery power to the medically vulnerable is the single largest portion here, but also a number of other areas, including our EV charging low power pilot. Finally, to close here, I want to note that the direction and feedback from board members really is essential to this work. There are a number of questions from a staff perspective that we look at in terms of getting guidance from the board, and of course you may have others. But these include, are there particular community needs that you see that should inform the program work, partnerships or strategies that should be considered? Are there key concerns, and perhaps is dialogue with certain stakeholders appropriate? And finally, of course, also how to best reach those most in need in the communities with our program work. Please provide direction and feedback along these lines or others that you see appropriate so that we can deliver the best programs possible for the community.